I recommend setting up a graphic organizer. It has 6 columns and 5 rows. Now that you have your graphic organizer, we're going to start filling it in. The first column, we're going to focus on the elements and some little tricks to help us remember those elements. Carbohydrates have carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. I try to remember chow. Like we like to chow down on carbs. We love those carbohydrates. We're thinking of breads and pastas. Something very special about carbohydrates is that they are found in a 1-to-1 ratio, meaning if we have 6 carbons, we're going to have twice as many hydrogens and half again the number of oxygens. So this is glucose and is found in a 1-to-1 ratio. The next molecule we're going to look at is lipids. These are our fats. They also are found in CHO, or to chow down, if you remember that. They have what's called a carbon backbone. They tend to have a long strand of carbon. It's really, really long. That's why lipids and fats, like oils, tend to be more viscous. They move very slowly and gooey because these long carbon chains are getting caught on one another. So you want to look for the long carbon chain, and then it only has like very little oxygen. That's the other trick to remember this, is that it has very, very little oxygen. The next one we're going to look at are proteins. Proteins have CHON. They're CHON, CHON. N stands for nitrogen. I try to remember that proteins end in an N, so this CHON also ends in an N. Proteins have what's called a carbolic acid group. There are a couple of other indicators as well, but for this level, we're going to look at the carbolic acid group. And so you can see a carbon is connected to an oxygen with a double bond here and a single bond over here. So you're going to look for the COO. Okay, proteins, we look for the COO. The last one are nucleic acids. Nucleic acids also have CHON, so there's a pattern here. Proteins and nucleic acids that both have N's have CHON in them. They have what are called carbon rings, but within this carbon ring, we have a nitrogen. So you can see that each of these corners has carbon ring, and we have a nitrogen in it. Something to be aware of, if it looks blank like this, it is assumed that each of these is a carbon, even if it's not written in. So we want to look for the carbon rings. The next column we're going to be looking at are what we call subunits, or monomers. Remember, monomers are like the individual cars of a train, and together they make what's called a polymer. It's a bigger molecule. So this would be the entire train. These are the individual cars on the train. So carbohydrates, one type of subunit is called glucose. And glucose we're going to be using a lot this year, and it's C6H12O6. That's all you need to know for right now, is that glucose makes up carbohydrates. With lipids, we have what are called fatty acids. And with proteins, we have what are called amino acids. And with nucleic acids, we have something called nucleotides. We're going to be discussing these in greater detail in the future. But for right now, you just need to write these in. So again, carbohydrates is glucose, lipids are fatty acids, proteins are amino acids, and the last one are nucleotides. Now we are going to examine how each of these molecules functions in living things. So let's first look at carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are used as a source of energy. We eat this, it's stored as sugar within our body or converted into ATP, and then we use it for energy. It also provides structural support. So you'll find carbohydrates within the cell walls of organisms. The next one we're going to look at are lipids, or our fats. Lipids are also used as a source of energy, and they also are coatings in an organism, such as waxes, steroids, and the like. So again, they're a form of energy. Like both carbohydrates and lipids are used for energy as well as for structures within cells. The next one we're going to look at are proteins. Proteins basically, we always think of protein as meat, But actually in the body, proteins are chemical messages. Our chemical messages are how our body works. So these control all metabolic reactions in organisms, meaning it helps the body to talk to itself. The last one we're going to look at are nucleic acids. And nucleic acids basically carry genetic information, basically in the form of either DNA or RNA. The next column looks at examples found in living things. So we're going to be looking again at carbohydrates. Cellulose is basically the cell walls in plants. Cellulose is what we use to make paper. So this is actually a carbohydrate that we have converted into a paper. Another one is something we call chitin. Chitin is the exoskeleton found in like crabs or insects, and it's that hard outer shell. And the last one is basically glycogen. Glycogen is a stored sugar in mammals that is converted into energy later on. The next group of macromolecules are the lipids and fats. These are found, they encircle every cell in your body. They make up the wax, pigments, such as the color of flowers, your skin, as well as steroids. A good example of proteins are basically enzymes. These are biological catalysts, which mean they speed up chemical reaction, as well as hormones, such as estrogen and testosterone. The last group of macromolecules are the nucleic acids. An example in living things is DNA and RNA. And we will be exploring these in more detail later on. The last column is about chemical tests that allow you to test different substances to see if there's a carbohydrate, a lipid, a protein. So for example, for carbohydrates, we use something called the Benedict's test that tests for sugars. We also use Lugel's iodine, which tests specifically for starch, because starch, like potatoes, is basically a converted sugar. There are two tests that you can do for lipids. One is an ethanol test, or you can do what's called a paper bag spot test. If you've ever gone out to eat and you've gotten a spot of oil on a paper bag, it tends to stain. It won't dry out over time. So that's a good way to tell that you have oil. It's kind of like what's left over underneath French fries on a paper towel. Protein, we use something called Biuret test. And then the last one, we look at nucleic acids, and this is a little bit more complex, and hopefully we'll be doing this in the spring. We do what's called gel electrophoresis, and we look at the different DNA molecules. Once you complete your graphic organizer, I always recommend looking for patterns. So for example, carbohydrates and lipids both have chow in them. They're both used as an energy source, and they're in coatings. Likewise, proteins and nucleic acids both have CHON in them. They're made out of subunits, and they're about chemical messages throughout the body and out throughout the cell. Hope this helps.